And we'll start right with our first speaker. It's a pleasure to introduce Emily Cross. Dance, you can already enter the stage. You're a dancer and a cognitive neuroscientist studying how experience forms the way we learn from each other. Since 23, you are a professor of social brain science at the Department of Humanities, Social and Political Science at E.A.T Zurich. A dear colleague of mine, welcome to Engadin, our talks.
Thank you so much. Pass it over here. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Philip, for these kind words of introduction. Also, thank you to you and the fellow curators, Hans Ulrich and Daniel. Thank you to Dale and her team, and to Christina, and also to Koyo, who I never had the chance to meet, but clearly from that very touching tribute that kicked us off this morning, her spirit lives on and it will elevate this event the whole weekend. So it's such a privilege to be among you all and to share a little bit about my work. And I do have a slide advance here. So as Philip said, I am now a professor of cognitive and social neuroscience at ETH Zurich. I have a background as a former professional dancer. And what I want to talk to you about today is hopefully a theme that is about bringing us together, and it's also about thinking about what makes us us as embodied social agents. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about work we've done in the realm of embodied neuroaesthetics. So thinking about my work and placing it in a slightly broader context, what I'm really interested in is how we perceive and make sense of and coordinate and inspire each other in embodied situations in everyday contexts. This is something that we're always doing from the moment we wake up in the morning until we go to sleep at night. It can be something as raising your hand to ask a question after one of these talks, or as sophisticated as climbing a mountain, running a race, building a house, creating art, many things in between. The human brain is incredibly richly involved to make sense of others that we see in these contexts. And we really don't have to think about that a lot. And that's in part because we all have bodies, we all have embodied experience, and even if we've not done all of these things, we can use our bodies to make sense of what we see others doing. But one question that's becoming a little more interesting to many colleagues and myself is, what happens when it's not just, oops, I've lost something there. There we go. Not just other bodies that are human and like us that we see, but other agents start to infiltrate our environment, and other technologies start to be doing human-like things. So this is something that we're becoming increasingly interested in, and what it means to be human and embodied, and what it means to interact with agents, artworks, and other artifacts that are digital and disembodied. So putting my research within a broader context, I kind of work across multiple areas. I'm interested in embodied algorithms or embodied robots that are supposed to engage with us in a social way. I'm interested in what's going on in our brains and our bodies when we interact with others in social contexts, and also what it means to be creative in an embodied sense. And I would say that all of these ideas come together under a big umbrella term of embodied intelligence, but also all of these themes are also going to touch on embodied aesthetics and embodied neuroaesthetics, which I'll be talking a bit more about this morning. So, what do I mean by embodied experience? What do I mean by embodiment per se? What we know is that doing things with our own bodies, experiencing things, being here. No one's watching this talk or engaging in this weekend online. We are all here. We are all physically situated. We are all engaging with each other in our physical manifestations. We know that this shapes our brain. We know that this shapes our behavior. And we have about 25 years of neuroscience research that tells us deep insights about this. First of all, we know that everyday actions, if you're a human and you can perform certain actions, you might perform those differently than a dog or a monkey might perform those actions. And we have brain science that shows us that our brains respond really differently when we see a human doing something that we can do ourselves compared to a dog or a monkey. We also have evidence that shows that our embodied experience means that we understand and our brains resonate in a very different way when we see humans doing grasping actions compared to robots doing those exact same actions. But that's not just everyday actions that we have these insights for. We also have lots of evidence in the world of performing arts. Some of my earliest work was in dance and trying to understand how dancers watching choreography that they've embodied compared to similar choreography that they've never actually practiced or rehearsed before, how this results in very different brain activity. We've seen this across a range of musical endeavors, including opera, including piano, pretty much every instrument and musical expression you can think of. We have really nice evidence to show how embodied experience shapes and changes your brain. But it's not just the arts. We also can see this in wine tasting, and we can see this in cooking as well. So people who are master chefs and know how to organize a very expert Michelin-starred kitchen, the way that they see cooking and create a recipe is really different than novice cooks or those who don't have this embodied experience of working in high-pressure culinary situations. So all sorts of embodied experience shapes and changes our brains. Now, this is something that we all know intuitively, but I think it's really interesting to see on a biological level, on a neuroscientific level, just how profoundly it changes our brains. So that's fine, that's great in our daily lives, whether it's in our artistic professions or just in normal daily life, our brain is shaped by experience. But what do we mean when we talk about aesthetics and neuroaesthetics and how the body comes into our experience of art? So I'm going to focus primarily, but not exclusively, on performing arts and dance. And what we mean by embodied neuroaesthetics is this. So neuroaesthetics is a relatively new field. It's been out for about the past 30 years, or it was born about 30 years ago. And what neuroaesthetics seeks to do is to understand and to characterize what's going on in the brain when we're having an aesthetic experience. So a lot of neuroaesthetics research focuses on beauty and pleasant aesthetic experiences, but of course, aesthetic experiences are not only kind of traditionally positive, we can also think about deep sorrow, being moved by sadness, etc. So it's not simply about positivity and beauty. And it's very much the case that over the past several decades, the bulk of research in this domain really focuses on visual art and paintings and fine arts, so much less about the performing arts. However, there has been some interest in understanding about dance and performing arts and whether our bodies whether there might be a role for parts of our brains that are involved in moving our bodies in an aesthetic response as well. And why this is interesting is that kind of the earliest work in paintings and a little bit in music as well really focused on parts of the brain that are involved in reward. So the same sort of reward you might get when you have a great meal or you earn a lot of money or have a hit of drugs or something like this. These reward brain regions were very much focused on, and also visual regions, because visual art, when you're looking at paintings, we know the part of the brain that's involved in vision is going to be very involved. But there is this question like, well, maybe there's other parts of the brain that have to do with moving our own bodies that are also involved when we're having an aesthetic experience watching the performing arts. And then my team has been really interested in pushing this forward and understanding not just are there parts of the brain that are involved in moving the body, but also how our own embodied experiences shape and change our perceptions to the performing arts and to the visual arts as well. So, just to talk a little bit about the foundations here, there was some early work by a colleague and friend, Beatriz Calvamarino, and her team, and they showed that when professional dancers were watching a certain type of dance that they had embodied experience for, so when ballet dancers watched ballet, or when capoeira dancers watched capoeira, that parts of their brain involved in linking action and perception were highly fired up. But this wasn't the case when ballet dancers watched capoeira, which they had no embodied experience for, or capoeira dancers watched ballet, which they had no experience for. So there was something really specific about their prior experience that was firing up these brain regions. After they ran this study, they decided to go back and ask what's going on when kind of non-dancers are watching any of these movements and rating them across a few different kind of very well-established aesthetic dimensions. And they kind of had people rate these movements based on how simple or complex they were, how dull or interesting, how tense or relaxed, weak or powerful, or how much they liked or disliked them. And they end up focusing just on this final one, because this is where, and this comes out again and again in a lot of neuroaesthetics research, this like-dislike dimension is the most powerful in terms of how we can pick up brain signals. And essentially what they found was that kind of across a group of non-dancer, just lay audience members, that people would assign higher scores to movements that had kind of really big, impressive displacement, and lower scores for movements, whether it was ballet or capoeira, that didn't move across the stage so much. And they found that parts of the brain that are involved in vision, because you're watching these movements, were involved. But they were the first to show that there's also, and you can see it circled with the B by it, part of the brain that's involved in kind of performing these movements themselves, even though these people couldn't perform them, that was also coming online. So this was kind of a really interesting first bit of evidence to say that it's not just vision, it's not just reward regions, but parts of the brain that are involved in us moving our bodies are also getting involved in the aesthetic experience. So we ran a study following this where we wanted to understand not just, okay, what do you like or dislike with dance, but how might that relate to what you can physically do yourself? So these people in the previous study, they never asked them what can they actually do, and we wanted to understand how this might shape this relationship. So we had people watch a bunch of really short videos of professional ballet dancers doing short moves that ranged across a complexity spectrum. Some were, really complex, like a dancer bringing her leg up in a développé right by her ear, and others were very simple, like a port-de-bras move, where a dancer would just move their arms like this. And people had to rate either how much they liked each movement. A bunch of video clips, and we had non-dance participants. So they had to rate how much they liked the videos they just saw, and also how well could you actually do that? And of course, we expected there to be a bit of a range there. So people would think, yes, I can do movements like this, but no, I cannot plie and then do 3 turns in the air and land with perfect aplomb. And this is precisely what we saw. And what was kind of really interesting as well is we saw this really strong negative relationship in that our non-dance participants really liked watching stuff that there was no way they could do with their own bodies. So they liked the big leaps, they liked the extensions into the splits, they liked the really impressive movements. They didn't really like so much watching the stuff that they said they couldn't, that they could do, such as moving their arms or walking in a circle, or much more kind of simple movements. And we called this, maybe it was a marketing ploy, maybe not, but just people would understand the Cirque du Soleil effect. We didn't study Cirque du Soleil, but this is what people pay good money for, to go to see opera, to see Cirque du Soleil, to see professional athletes, to see dance. You want to see people do stuff that is remote from what you can do. Really, really spectacular movements that take a lot of training to perform. And that's exactly what our data bear out. But in terms of what the brain data showed us, I won't get into it in great detail, but we kind of find a nice replication for what that very first study with the ballet and capoeira dancers showed, but we show something that's really interesting as well, that even when you're watching stuff that there's no way you could ever perform it with your own body because you've not trained for these many years as a professional dancer, we still see part of the brain, which you can see in that right brain figure, and it might just look like a little blob, and it is a little blob, but it's in a part of the brain, which is the imperioparietal sulcus, which we know is involved in learning new movements and linking action and perception. So we almost look at this as, this is people watching stuff they cannot do at all, but they really like to watch. So we think of this almost as aspirational embodiment, like your brain is saying, like, this is so cool, I want to be able to learn this, I want to be able to do this, even if you can't. So this was a really quite exciting finding. We've then followed that up and not just asked, what's this relationship between what you like and what you can or can't do, but what happens when we train you to do new things? And hopefully this clip won't blast our ears out, but this just shows you that we had people come in and non-dancers and learn some kind of hip-hop, kind of popular dance movements along with the video game context, which you can see here. So it was, these were 1.5 minute dance sequences they learned, but you're just seeing a very short 3-second clip here, and people would have to kind of imitate those movements and be in time with the music, and they would get scores kind of in a rolling feedback scenario. And this bit doesn't really matter, but we scanned their brains multiple times, and we had them come in and practice these movements day after day. And what we find, essentially, is that once people actually have a chance to try something out with their own bodies, and not just kind of watching as novices with no embodied experience, but when we give them training, when we teach them how to move in these ways, they end up liking the stuff that they can do actually a lot better. And what we also see is that there's this real shift in the brain as well, where kind of, again, these look like tiny little specks on brains, but what I want to draw your attention to is in those first 2 brains on the left, when people are watching stuff that they like, we see regions that are associated with reward processing. But once you experience these and practice and become really good at moving to these choreographic works, parts of the brain that are involved in linking action and vision and music and audition all together, this multisensory integration, are coming much more online. So we're seeing people's brains change even over the course of a week as they learn to embody things. So I think there's some really interesting implications for arts communities and audience building and kind of getting people to embody what they're about to see on stage, or at least kind of take a few steps towards that. Yes, embodiment changes everything is the take-home point there. That really sure where I'm pointing, maybe back there. So what we can conclude so far is that embodiment in performing arts aesthetics, it's subtle, it's non-linear, it's not always the same relationship, and experience does change things. And yes, it's complex, but it's a really exciting area to be digging into. We've also gone a little bit beyond this and tried to ask not just what happens when people rate things, but what sort of subtle cues can we pick up on people when they're watching something without thinking about, do I like this or not? And for this, we used a different sort of technology called facial electromyography, which you can see illustrated in that picture there. And we use this technology with a group of dancers, so expert ballet and contemporary dancers, and a very similar group of non-dancers who are the same age, same education level, etc. And they watched a bunch of these videos like you just saw, while we took recordings from, oh, sorry, those letters went a bit funny, but two different muscles. So one, the corrugator muscle, which is above the eyebrow. We know that this muscle is involved with expressing displeasure. It can also be involved with boredom or lack of understanding. And then the zygomaticus muscle, which is right here on the cheek. And this is a muscle that we know is implicated. It's one of many muscles that's involved in smiling, but we know that it can also be involved when expressing pleasure and liking something. The really important thing about these technologies is that people aren't watching videos and going like this or going like this. There's no actual overt facial movements. People are just sitting in a lab and watching them. But really, really subtle engagement of these muscles can be picked up by this technology. And it's been kind of proven to be really effective in this way. And what we saw in this study, oh, we have some videos now playing, is that among our non-dancers, we don't really see any separation in this muscle activity when they're watching these movements, but our dancers, across 3 seconds of each videos, we really see a nice separation of more engagement of this smiling muscle when they're watching movies that they tell us later that they really liked watching, and we see more engagement of this corrugator muscle when our dancers are watching movies that they later tell us, I wasn't really that interested in that, and it was kind of boring. So we kind of have these nice physiological measures of kind of pulling out what aesthetics means in an embodied sense. The dancers have a lot of experience, and their bodies are kind of reflecting their pleasure and enjoyment of these movements in a subtle but recordable way. So, and I won't go into this in great detail, but we have further work using mobile brain imaging techniques, which are really exciting, where we can actually have people kind of doing dance and mirroring type tasks in a social context while their brains are being scanned in real time with a technology called functional near-infrared spectroscopy. It's a really exciting frontier for this work, and especially for arts and performing arts contexts. And here as well, we have evidence that shows if people kind of know that they've embodied a movement before, and they've synchronized with another person in a dance movement task, this also leads to more positive aesthetic evaluations and increased engagement of these brain regions, which are linking up what you were kind of linking up the perception and the action components. So some really exciting frontiers here. I want to say just a little bit about visual art as well, because we're really interested in people's kind of perspective taking and embodied experience and what's going on when visual art is evaluated. And this is work that I've done with an outstanding colleague of mine who is an art historian by training and has formerly worked as a museum curator in Romania. And what some of the stuff we're doing is asking whether when you're at a gallery, when you're looking at paintings, if you're thinking about how much you like the paintings in your own perspective compared to trying to understand or rate what the general public might think about paintings. So do you evaluate a painting with your own perspective or the perspective of the general public, how this shapes how people evaluate paintings. And in this eye tracking study, what we see, where we can kind of measure how long people are spending looking at paintings and where they're looking at the paintings, is that when people are evaluating paintings and thinking about others' minds, they spend a lot longer looking at those paintings compared to just assessing for themselves. And we also see that there's quite an interesting difference when people are looking at paintings that feature landscapes versus people. So no matter who you're evaluating for, people also spend a much longer time evaluating paintings that have people in them. And another really elegant piece of work that she's doing, which I think is so interesting from an art perspective and also from an aesthetics perspective, this hasn't really been looked at. She's really interested in Rückenfigur paintings and what's going on when people are looking at the body that's facing the viewer versus the body that's facing away from the viewer. And yeah, there's some more very nice eye tracking data that shows that not only are Rückenfigur paintings rated as more aesthetically pleasing by a very large population of non-art experts, but just, we have many examples across the Rückenfigur and the front-facing portraits, but also people rate them as having a much more deeply rich emotional content. And we think this has to do with the fact that you can embody and take the perspective of the subject in a painting in a much richer way when they're facing away from you, because you're kind of sucked in that first-person view, than when someone's facing towards you. So again, really interesting insights which only come from this deep collaboration with an art historian, which is exciting. So, expanding the picture a little bit more, this is my last slide before I wrap up, and we can have an interesting conversation. We're also really interested in kind of this point about not just having a body and kind of human-based art, but what the body means when art starts to be created by digital means or in collaboration with digital means. And we had a fantastic lecture yesterday at the Lyceum with the high school students about this, and I won't be able to get into much of it now, but a bit dark. We're doing a lot of work in this space as well with kind of AI-generated dance and what this means for people's perspectives of whether it's enjoyable to watch and whether their bodies kind of come along for the ride or not. We're doing a lot with visual arts as well and trying to understand people's moral perspectives on the use of AI to make money in the visual arts. And we have a really exciting collaboration. It's a funded project with Manu Hendry at the ZHDK in Zurich, where we're doing this kind of embodied AI performance art piece with eye tracking, with brain scanning, with many different things. And the really interesting thing about that as well is we're trying to understand what happens when people are engaging with an embodied AI agent that kind of turns rogue and starts to be quite nasty and abusive to them, which is something we do not expect from AI. So it's an exciting space. We start collecting data on Monday, so watch this space. And our aims and interests here, this sounds lofty, and I do not suppose that we're going to be the ones to update, but I think we can contribute to updating definitions and theoretical foundations of what art is. And this always brings up really interesting debates about when AI is involved, where do we draw the line on what is and what isn't art? Also, I think we can help develop deeper insights into the very well-documented anti-AI biases that are strong among the general public, but are even stronger among artists and professionals working in this space. And if we can start to understand through the tools that we have, what's at the root of these biases, and are these biases shifting, this could be quite valuable. And we hope to help empirically ground the norm cascades. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that our relationship with AI in 2026 is very different than our relationship with AI was in 2021, or 2016, or 2011. So as time goes by, kind of our expectations and our fears and what we think is acceptable with AI is changing a lot. And I think our tools can really help us to understand why things are changing, and do we need to be a bit more vigilant about what we are accepting as okay in this space. And then I think most importantly, of course, helping to explore how we can protect artists and the arts while also supporting collaboration and creative collaboration with these technologies. I think this is something that I'm really excited about, and I think Switzerland and ETH in particular are really good places to be kind of experimenting with these ideas. So I'd like to finish with my main summary here, which is just that the body's important, and the body really shapes how we perceive and engage with all manner of arts, not just the performing arts. And thinking about our bodies and not just being sucked into screen-based experiences and understanding what being among others in performing arts and in visual arts contexts brings to the experience. And why this is important is, yes, I think this will help us to understand more about what makes us uniquely human and why we derive pleasure from the arts in the first place, and also to this final point, where our lines in the sand are for saying this is or isn't art, or I can allow myself to enjoy this or not when digital technologies and AI are involved. So with that, I leave you with a thank you slide for all of my fabulous team members and funders, and hopefully we can have a bit of a conversation now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily, for this wonderful introduction, which would lead to several Engadin Art Talks topics. We're a little bit short on time. This is not your fault. You were Swiss watch-like, but we started late, so I will not ask all my questions, but give the audience the possibility to ask a question right now. Yeah.
Hello, I wanted to ask you something about art education of young children. I was just thinking, because when you say you can enjoy it more when you did it yourself, like when you were singing, will you enjoy more a concert or performance or music, or if you did yourself try to paint as a child? Is that something you've investigated?
So the answer is categorically yes. And we've investigated this a little bit, and there's many, many studies that have, and this is why I think, and I don't know if this is as widespread in Switzerland. From my experience so far, I've not seen it, but in the UK and the US, there's such a push towards STEM subjects and making sure science and technology, et cetera, and that the arts are getting cut off, and especially in younger ages for younger children. And we know that it is so important to, not just for cultivating the next generation of arts aficionados, but also for kind of giving kids the capacity to think creatively and to think expansively. It is so important. But it is very much the case as well that lots and lots of empirical data show that people who've trained in singing, who've trained in violin, who've trained in dance, they derive so much more pleasure, and their brains are responding in fundamentally different ways when they're sitting in the audience and perceiving as a spectator what's going on stage.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Please, Ilona.
Thank you for your presentation. It just popped up a question in me that bothers me since a long time. Is the brain only in the brain? And as you were talking about the movements and singing as an experience, especially the movement is also in the muscles. I had an early experience with drawing. I had no model, but I wanted to draw a special movement of or a position of the arm. So totally intuitively, I took this position and I draw it in a very simple way. And this helped me a lot. So is the brain also in the cells or in the muscles? We had a discussion yesterday with Bethany Hughes about that. So I would like to hear your answer about that.
This is a nice question, and absolutely, like when we talk about embodied cognition, just like in that duo of words, we're talking about the body, and with cognition, we're talking about the brain. But really, like the embodiment and the cognition are throughout the whole system. And we know that the central nervous system, of course, is not just the brain; it extends to the nerves, the muscles, everything that kind of supports us as embodied beings. But categorically, yes, like that knowledge kind of translates to the whole body, and it's not just something that's super cerebral. And I hope what I communicated is that we can see how our kind of bodily experiences, practicing singing, practicing dancing, cooking, whatever it is, how that shapes our brains. But this is a bi-directional dialogue, and it's always, the two are shaping each other, and I don't see them really as separate, kind of all one part of the same system. So it makes complete sense that you could draw this better by getting into the position. And I think with screens and technology, we're getting farther and farther away from using our bodies to kind of simulate what it is we're trying to understand, and that's dangerous. And we because there is so much richness in our experience and how we can use these limbs and our bodies to make sense of the world and to understand it better.
A beautiful conclusion. Many thanks for this wonderful presentation. A big applause for Emily.